Good afternoon and welcome to the Problem of Being Awake. My name's Ben, I'll be your host. And I want to talk about something called the Cobra Effect, which is an ancient tale, and how it links into modern race baiting and anti-racist literature and anti-racist teaching and DEI and all of the rest of what is fueling race hatred in the world today. And I must state that in human history, we were least racist in the 90s and early 2000s. And we've become now as racist as we were when we almost genocidally killed each other in Africa thousands of years ago, well over 10,000 years ago. In that case, it was fear of the unknown, bigotry. That's what got tribes to kill one another. And enslave one another. I mean, slavery has been part of every single culture that's ever existed in human times. It's older than language, way older, in fact. It was there in the Mesopotamian Empire, which is the first ever empire. It's been everywhere since. The Native Americans were massive slave owners. They would take over a tribe, bigotry, fear of the unknown, but they would enslave that tribe. So the idea that the whole of slavery should be focused on just the transatlantic slave trade that traded 12.5 million people, which is abhorrent, don't get me wrong, is a bit of a weak argument when there are 50 million people being traded every year as slaves today. 50 million, so 4 times the Atlantic slave trade. Now, I'm not trying to make an argument for anything like that being acceptable. It wasn't, but by the standards of the day, it was, and you can't judge people by the standards of today if they lived 400 years ago. I'm sorry, it just doesn't make any sense. There's no mathematical equation that makes that work, especially if you can appreciate that if you were a certain person of means in America or England and you didn't own slaves, you would be looked at with skepticism. There was no freedom of expression or freedom of anything back in those days. If you didn't own slaves, but every one of your neighbours did, it wouldn't be long before somebody came knocking on your door to find out what was wrong with you. And the likelihood would be you'd be put to death for being outside the norm. So this is something called the Cobra Effect. We know it happened. We don't know exactly when, but it happened in Delhi, in British colonial India. The Maharaja, who was British appointed, had a problem with cobras in the city, and he incentivized the problem to try and get the people to help fix it. And this is why good ideas often end up being adopted by bad people to make money off them. So the Cobra Effect was that for every cobra you killed, you got paid a certain amount of money. Now, most of the initial people went out and tried to hunt down cobras and kill them. But it didn't take long at all for people to realize in the inner city that breeding cobras was for killing and for the bounty was far more economically efficient and safer than going out and hunting them. So suddenly these massive amounts of not farmers, but it's sort of breeders, started breeding cobras. So they were killing them off at the rate of knots, sorry. And they were getting paid at the rate of knots, but still the cobra problem was growing 2 times, 4 times. It was just consistently growing. They couldn't work it out. So an investigation was done, and they found out what was happening, which was that there were a number of people who set up cobra breeding farms within the city so that they could just collect the bounty on them. Once they're fully developed, kill them, collect the bounty. Once they found out this was happening, they removed the bounty. And then all of these cobra farmers had cobras everywhere, and I was like, well, we're not going to get anything for them, we're going to let them loose. And they did. And Delhi was, and still is, one of the biggest places for cobra infestation and especially the woods around Delhi and the outskirts, got huge amounts of cobras that were bred to be killed for a bounty that stopped. And once the incentive stopped, the bad actors stopped doing the thing that was getting them the money. But being bad actors, they didn't kill the cobras out of goodwill. They let them loose on the public. Now, I'm going to apply that directly to modern day race relations. Joe Biden should never have said America is a systemically racist country. A country can't be racist. Racism is a personal, internally held belief. To say a system is racist would mean you'd have to know and have interviewed every single person in that system and confirmed by their own admission that they are racist to call that system racist. Now, you can, and it's like statues. Statues aren't racist. They just can't be because they don't have internally held beliefs. But you can say they represent a time when racism was more prevalent. You can say that. You can't say that they are racist. You can't say a system is racist. You can say a system represents a time when race relations weren't what they are now, and maybe that system needs to change in that direction. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you can't call it racist because it's not an internally held belief, because it's a system. It doesn't have the ability to hold internal beliefs, not at all. And that's exactly what racism is, an internally held belief. Now, you can't call a group racist either, unfortunately. You could, here would be one where you would make a judgment. Neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klan. But within the Ku Klux Klan, you would have had some people who were going along for the ride, some people who were doing it to impress somebody for some other reason, and the degree of racism and hatred toward black people, from the Grand Wizard to the lowliest of foot soldiers, would be a very big curve, because people weren't just involved in the movement because they had this, combined hatred, although I would say that's the most hateful movement ever. And they had a massive amount of combined hatred, but some of them were in it for their own business ideas. They wanted to be friends with people who had money. And so, obviously, it's a horrible stain on American history, but it happened. And not everybody in the Ku Klux Klan was equally racist. You cannot say that. And you could only say it today if you managed to track down every member and interview every member asking the same questions, which you can't do. So you can't call a group racist. It's like you can't be offended on behalf of a group because you need the signatures of everyone in that group to make that offensive. Something can't be offensive unless it can be offensive directly to you, and you can say that offends me. That's fine. But you cannot say that is offensive to the LGBT community, or that's offensive to black people, or that's offensive to Asian people, or whatever. You can't say that because you haven't interviewed them all. You haven't got their opinions. You're just making your own opinion based on what you see in front of you. Now, one of the key bad actors in this is Robin DiAngelo. I'm going to unpack her book in her ideas as completely false and completely irresponsible. So let's say the goal is to end racial discrimination or discrimination of any kind, which is an ultimate goal for society, but can never actually be 100% achieved. Because as I said, there will always be people who have internally bigoted views. They're in a vast minority, maximum 2% across the Western world. But race baiters, race haters, they'll tell you that actually all white people are inherently racist or unconsciously racist. Now, as a psychologist, I can tell you that your subconscious mind, or your unconscious, is designed to bring your deepest desires into your conscious mind for your awareness. So if you've not had deep desires of racism and race hatred come into your mind from your unconscious, it doesn't exist in your unconscious. The other one I'll address is implicit bias. This is to say that we're all responsible for the wrongdoings of our ancestors, and to quote Ibrahim X. Kendi, this absolute dickhead, that the cure for past racism is present racism. So turn it around, make the world anti-white. Now that's really pulling at the strings at the moment of society, because guess what? The majority of people are white, and they're getting fed up of being told that they don't know something that other people of minorities do, because we've all been enslaved. I'm sorry, we have all been enslaved. I'm not talking to anyone whose ancestors have not been enslaved. That wouldn't be possible. So everybody has it. Everybody has a dark history of it. And to use it as a modern day excuse to reverse racism so that white people are put on the back foot, so that university studies like whiteness is the problem of our era, or whiteness is responsible for all slavery around the globe. Well, considering there's 50 million slaves living around the globe at the moment in slavery, and only 12.5 million in the total of the transatlantic slave trade, no one's picking up on the 50 million. That's far more. That's 4 times more than were ever traded in the Atlantic slave trade. And where do those slaves come from? Predominantly Africa. And they're sold predominantly into the Middle East and Asia. That's where the slave trade is today, and black on black slavery in Africa is as big as it ever was. And it was always big. I'm not here to make a case for slavery at all, right? It is an abomination. It's the worst thing you can do to a human soul. But I'm here to say that we did it. And it happened. But it also happened to everybody else. If you look at the Irish, if you look at the British and enslaved by the Romans, in fact, if you look at any empire, any industrialized civilization, any pre-industrialized civilization, everyone had slavery. It predates language by about 5,000 years. Slavery and prostitution were the first industries. Then weapon making. And these were all before language developed. So to get an idea of world history, it's important to notice that. Now we have Robin DiAngelo with a book that was never peer-reviewed and has since been looked at by a number of psychological professors who would grant doctoral thesis, which is, the idea, say, yes, run with that idea, write a paper on it. And they've all unanimously come out and said that all of Robin DiAngelo's ideas make no sense, and they would never have accepted it as the subject matter for a doctoral thesis. Which is why she didn't have it peer-reviewed. It's just her own opinions. But she brought into the world white supremacy, white privilege, white guilt, and white fragility. Now, I'm here to say, if you're white and you feel guilty, stop feeling guilty because you have been told this by somebody who has no qualifications. She makes a fortune lecturing about it, lecturing to white people about how racist they are because she thinks she knows something they don't. But actually, if you look at any one of her theories up against the mirror, if you put it up against any type of academic critique, it falls away completely because it makes no sense. Ibram Kendi was completely wrong when he said that the cure to past discrimination is present discrimination. It's called reverse racism. Affirmative action got made illegal, but DEI is still in the process of being made illegal. But it doesn't work for either party. People say, oh, well, some people need a leg up. Well, imagine you're, at the moment, you've just qualified, you're a black doctor right now in the USA or the UK. You would have to always second guess how much of your experience and how much of the weight you carry professionally is down to your merit and you as a person, or down to the fact that you happen to tick a quota. Now, that's a horrible situation for a very bright black person to be in, because it should be, and always should be, a meritocracy. The best person for the job gets the job. And in that case, then everyone can hold their head up high because they earned their place. And there is not a single ethnic minority that's been mentioned in the last 10 years that doesn't have shining examples of people who succeeded to beyond even their expectations and beyond the world's expectations to become masters of their crafts. And that's true of every ethnicity you can think of. So black people, Jewish people, Indian, African, Jamaican, then obviously Hispanic. Well, Hispanic's a bit too wide. Latino, Spanish-based, Portuguese-based. Every single demographic of people has succeeded beyond all measure they put in front of themselves. So if they can do it, then it's doable. Thomas Sowell is a wonderful example. He's a brilliant black writer, an economist and political commentator, who's reached the pinnacle of his career. He supported Martin Luther King in his early days, at least. And if you're against the idea that, if you think that, positive discrimination against white people now is just and is what white people should deserve, they should be there. It should be okay that there are multiple places in universities across the Western world where white people aren't allowed to speak, but they're allowed to listen. If you think that's okay, then I can't be of any help to you, but you're wrong. And you will find out you're wrong. And if you keep pushing it, unfortunately, if you keep telling the majority of people in the country they're inherently racist, the ones who push back will become the majority, and they will push back hard because it's not a nice thing to do. We had great race relations in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, brilliant. Now we are at each other's throats like we were 10,000 years ago in Africa, when the human race almost disintegrated into non-existence because of bigotry, black on black tribal bigotry and slavery. So there is no just reason for any of this, but certainly to try and make up for it by being prejudiced against white people is to effectively commit exactly the same sin onto another person as your complaining was put onto your ancestors. Now, that sin was great. I would love to apologize for that as a globe for all slavery, but I'm not involved. And nobody alive today is, except the people who are running the current slave markets in the other parts of the world. I can't apologize because I've got nothing to apologize for. I didn't do it. I wasn't around. I don't know if my family had slaves or not. Arguably, I think they probably did at one point. No record of it. So I can't apologize. And I shouldn't be asked to. Because imagine this, if reparations were to happen in the US, a whole load of better off black Americans would be taking money from poverty-stricken white Americans for the sins of ancestors gone past. It doesn't make any sense. The true statement, which I think it came from the Supreme Court of the United States, is the only way to end discrimination based on skin colour is to end discrimination based on skin colour. It is not to reverse that discrimination, to change the skin colour that's discriminated against. So I'll leave it there. Think about what I've said. Think about the Cobra Effect. There's always going to be bad actors who rely on the money that the government laid out because the government had good intentions. So think about that and have a good Christmas. Enjoy yourself, and I'll speak to you soon.